So for today, we're going to have our fairly informal presentation, take about half an hour. We'll have some optional Q&A after that for anybody that wants to stick around and chat or ask very specific questions about what they're up to. And I will just to take a quick moment before we go any further to just ask Taylor from our team. Taylor, can you confirm that the slides are showing and that my audio sounds all right?
Yeah, you're all good.
Perfect, thank you. And as well, there will be a recording available next week of the presentation, so no need to take notes or anything, assuming there's some notes worth taking. In terms of the speaker background, aka myself, I've been in and around digital marketing since 2001. On the advertising front, I have bought and sold advertising for companies like Pentax and DivX. At one point, I became the backup for a company I worked at to manage a large ad serving platform for a 15 million visitor per month website that we were running. Since starting our agency in 2007, we've had a real focus on advertising, mostly search advertising, but we've also spent millions and millions of dollars on the social platforms for advertising as well. Been a Google Premier Partner for 7 years, which means that Google has stated that we're in the top 3% of Google agencies in the country, which is something I'm pretty proud of with our little company here in Victoria. And I have, on behalf of clients over the years, been a real thorn in the side of advertising vendors, because there's a lot of funny stuff that goes on in advertising, and we'll jump into some of that. So to start, the principles of advertising are simple. However, the execution of advertising, and particularly digital advertising, but really all kinds, is hard. And so looking at what we think of when we think of traditional advertising, like brand advertising, sort of advertising that might appear on TV or in print generally, brand advertising, which today is focused mostly on social and display advertising, this basically works by positioning you as the company of choice for your buyers. And then on the flip side, there's direct response, which used to be a bit of an outlier in advertising, but with Google, it's become sort of a main channel for a lot of folks. Direct response ads work by getting your offering in front of the people who are shopping right now for what you sell. This is all pretty straightforward. Again, the mechanisms are fairly simple in a lot of ways, or the strategy is fairly simple in a lot of ways. The execution is where the devil is. So some advertising truths. I mean, I'm big on advertising, but definitely word of mouth is more powerful than advertising, like what other people are saying about you and recommending. What advertising does do is it reaches out to people who don't already have a go-to for what it is that you provide. Sad fact is that a huge percentage of advertising doesn't work. But with that said, advertising can still be the fastest and most effective way to scale your sales, to grow your sales. And this is where you can't control word of mouth. You can't really make people talk about you. There are ways you can influence a bit, but in general, you can't control and scale your word of mouth efforts. But you absolutely can buy and scale ads if you get good at it and have some success with it. And one kind of note too, just on that part about the huge percentage of advertising not working, big reasons it doesn't work is typically that the advertising isn't strategically aligned with what the potential buyers want. It might not be relevant. Maybe the advertising isn't compelling, or if the advertising can be great, but if it's not paired with a persuasive experience when the viewer comes to your website or your store, it's still not going to work. So jumping along. So looking at some concepts of advertising, there's this idea of a bit of a slider or a mixing lever. There are a few different purchase factors, and one is whether a purchase is discretionary, like somebody might buy but they don't need to buy, or whether it's urgent or a mandatory thing. And I mean, a great example would be, on one hand, if you have a pipe burst in your home, you need to engage a plumber. There's no sort of thinking about it. Unless you happen to be a plumber, you're going to pick up the phone or go to Google if you don't know one already and find one. Versus buying, say, yet another shirt. If you see one you like, you might purchase it, but there's really no urgency, and it's just totally a discretionary purchase. Sort of a next step on the scale is kind of whether something is a luxury purchase or sort of a utility purchase. And this example might be considering, the difference between, again, that designer shirt or a sports car at the luxury end versus, say, maybe needing to buy some deck screws for your weekend project on the utility end. And then kind of where that actually leads to and kind of makes some sense is that in terms of the advertising type that you're doing, if you have a pure luxury discretionary product, you're going to really lean more towards branding and display ads. Whereas if you have a product that or service that is bought or engaged with by people who have an urgent need, direct response, aka search, is absolutely the way to go. If they don't already know about you, they're going to search. So that's absolutely the way to go. And same with the utility elements. So, with that said, how do you figure out where your company sits on the branding to direct response scale? And first off, understanding your offering gives you a way better understanding of how to advertise. And we see this all the time. The biggest thing, especially with the predominance of social advertising right now, advertising on social media, is we see again and again and again people who are clients who come to us, they've been disappointed by the lack of response to their social media advertising, but they're really they've got a product that's more direct response or more urgent, but they're advertising to people who aren't in the market. So really helps to understand. And also, as a company or professional, you might also have different products or services that sit in different places. So just looking at some simple examples, to take e-commerce and fashion, and it's worth noting there will be some exceptions to all of these, but I'm going to speak in generalities that apply to most situations. If you've got an e-commerce site selling fashion items, it's almost purely a branding play. It's almost never urgent. Versus if you look at something like e-commerce, a company that sells tools, for instance. That's one where brand certainly comes into play, but there's also that utilitarian and urgent end of things. If somebody needs a specific tool to accomplish a specific task, they go to the web to look for the best place to buy it, go to the site, and then ideally buy it. Looking at sort of a software as a service example and maybe some customer relationship management software, that's kind of really an interesting one because it's typically not urgent, but is absolutely kind of utilitarian. It's not a product that people buy to be cool, so it's kind of in the middle there. And the other thing there is as well, a product like this typically has a long sales cycle, so it kind of might be in the middle of the scale, whether it makes sense to look at search or display, aka brand or direct response advertising. Tourism and travel, another interesting area. So for instance, on the most destinations and most properties, say a hotel at a destination, they can't afford to brand their independent hotel across the continent. That said, they might look at some branding ads for people within a short hop flight. They might identify their absolute most valuable target within that short hop area and build their brand with that group on display. But then, of course, more than likely, if they're looking at people coming from far away, near impossible to accurately identify those folks except through search. So they're probably going to do search advertising for promoting room bookings or in their hotel property. Looking at some more traditional businesses as well, like a wellness center. You can look at something like a physiotherapy or a physical therapy offering. That's probably going to be quite urgent in that somebody's probably injured and is looking for care. So that's something like physio or chiropractic. You get a lot of urgency around it, so that does really well with search. Whereas something like athletic therapy, which is an emerging area, it's more proactive. So it's folks that are active and want to avoid injury in the future, or to help treat stuff, but typically not acute elements. So that's a case where probably pure search, well, not probably, because I've seen it personally, pure search does not work as well as with the more urgent things. So that's where you might want to be incorporating some branding elements, some branding advertising as well. And then again, our good old plumbing company example, if somebody needs emergency plumbing services, search is absolutely the only place that you can compete at that point. Whereas if somebody's considering upgrading to a tankless water heater, or accessing a grant to improve their home heating or something like that, that's absolutely an area where display and more brand-oriented ads and even direct response even creeps into display a bit. We'll touch on that later. Or if you look at something like a law firm, there's a lot of law firms that spend a lot of time branding, and there is absolutely value in that. But most folks, when they have a legal problem, it is quite urgent. And if they don't have an established vendor, they go to search. So definitely that would, to me, that would lean much towards that search end. So looking at defining the ad types and what kind of do we mean is direct response is kind of interesting. I mean, formerly it was the yellow pages. If you want to order a pizza, open the yellow pages. If your pipe burst, again, our plumber friend, you went to the yellow pages. If you wanted to buy a used car, you might go to the classifieds or look for any other kind of service, go to the classifieds. That's pretty much been, with some exception, that's pretty much been taken over now by search ads. And I mean, as well, there's aggregator sites that aggregate companies, but in general, the vast majority of direct response advertising now goes through search and through Google. So the brand advertising, formerly that was folks were looking at basically TV, radio, and print for that. And currently, I mean, those mediums still have value in the right applications, but what's become sort of much more accessible and much more leveraged is, of course, display advertising through social media and websites. So jumping a bit deeper into direct response, it truly is super simple. Somebody has need for a product or service. If they don't already know who to get it from, they go to Google. Your ad shows up offering more or less exactly what they're looking for. They click through, go to your website, and see if you're a good fit or not. And it really is that simple. Factors for success in direct response really involve relevance, like getting the right ad in front of the right person at the right time, credibility. If somebody comes to your website looking like a professional and credible company that can deliver on what they're looking for is key, and you'd be amazed at how often that doesn't happen. And then persuasiveness, just having some persuasive elements on the website to help encourage people to take that next step to buy now or to get in touch, to book a call, whatever it is. The purchase cycle, it's also a real factor in success, at least within a certain time frame. And basically, if a purchase thing, like again, the emergency plumbing example, household repairs, auto repair, anything like that, that's fairly straightforward to capitalize on because that purchase happens right away. If it's something like that customer relationship management example where it's a long-term purchase, it gets much more complicated because folks aren't likely going to buy in the first visit. They're probably going to go and do some comparison shopping, and the purchase cycle is going to be a lot longer. So that's not to say that search isn't appropriate for that kind of example, but rather that measuring immediate success is a lot harder. And then this funny one, but math really comes into play, and we'll have a look at a real example for this. But basically, is your average transaction value or your purchase price, does that justify the cost per acquisition? And in looking at that using actual math, what we've got here is a screenshot from an actual client from a little while ago. It's a family law practice over in Vancouver. In their case, we're able to measure in Google Ads exactly how many contact conversions occurred. So basically, how many times did people try and get in touch with them after coming to the website? And in this example, in this period that's shown, there's 113 of these contact conversions at an average cost of $19.55 per the contact conversion. Of course, that's a factor of the cost per click times the number of clicks times how many people actually converted and reached out. And then if we look in the bottom corner there, we actually see this sort of broken out, aka the math. We've got cost per contact conversion. From internal information I got from them, they figured they actually landed as clients about 1 out of every 6 people who contacted. So we can then, again, using our handy dandy spreadsheet, see that the average cost per client acquisition was about $130 per client. In their case, they earn about $5,000 per client. So the math stacks up ridiculously well. So even on that first transaction, they have a gross ROI of something like 3,800%. And they figure they'll get some more business out of each client over the years. So their estimate was that their average client lifetime value was about $6,000, which means a 4,600% return on investment for them, at least a gross return on investment. And I wish that we could do that for everybody. Life would be easy. Scenario 2 that's there is an example of a chiropractor. In this case, it's somebody that didn't have online booking, but had people reaching out with inquiries. And in that case, costs about $38 for one of these contact conversions, quite competitive space. They felt that they were converting about a third of their inquiries into bookings, which made the cost per client acquisition about $128. So with their average first transaction value of $100, they're actually underwater on that first transaction. They're only making 78% gross ROI on all the money that they're getting. Fortunately, in their case, in this example, again, another client, they've been at it long enough to know that they do get repeat visits, that their average client to customer lifetime value is about $900. So in that case, they get about a 700% ROI considering in that manner, and they do actually advertise on that basis to them. It's but the only advertising channel they get clients from, so they're quite comfortable advertising at that. But again, whatever your product, whatever your business, doing the actual math on it like this, and even just kind of guessing what the math is going to be when you start, is a great place to begin. And longer term, it will tell you if it makes sense to advertise or not. Direct response math for e-commerce. This is actually again a screenshot. In this case, there's a variety of different campaigns that range from a sort of a 5.4 gross return on 5.4 times gross return on investment, which would be 540%. Which incidentally, at that rate, it's not quite profitable for them, up to a 23 times return on investment. I think they average, their target is to get customers at around a 7%, a 7 times return on investment, or 700% gross ROI. And basically, we've been working with them for about 1.5 years. And as long as we're hitting that 7+% overall, they're quite happy because they know that they're being profitable at that rate. And again, if you're selling through e-commerce, you absolutely need to do that. Some challenges in direct response includes focusing on relevance rather than intent. And so, for instance, in the plumbing example, if you're not careful with the keywords you're bidding on when people are searching, you can get a lot of DIYers hitting your ad wanting to learn something, so causing your cost per action to soar exponentially. There's a lot of competition. Now, it's obvious that there's a lot of money to be had through search advertising, so there's a lot of competition for this. Other vendors, other companies are going to be competing against you. That increases the cost because it is a bid bidding platform. And it really drives home a need for just absolute excellence in the execution to make money doing it. A recent example, we took over an account in the US that was being managed by one of the local television affiliates. Everybody seems to be doing advertising management now, and they were doing the Google ad management, and they were making that relevance example. So we, within weeks of launching that, and actually Taylor, who's on the call, is managing that account. So nice work, Taylor. Lowered the cost per click from $11 per click to under $5, which they're extremely happy with, while also increasing the quality of the visitors. So basically drove, in a very short period of time, drove a 4 times improvement before and after in that situation. So it just, not to brag, although obviously I'm bragging a bit, but just to highlight how big a difference the care and attention and excellence is that you apply to the account. And then, of course, the conversion experience. If you can do the best advertising in the world, but if your website does not convert visitors into customers, there's really no point. So brand advertising, successful brand advertising involves, first off, identifying an audience where it would be advantageous to be top of mind. Basically, and we can all think of companies that assume that position. I mean, at the top end of it, the brand becomes the product name. So people talk about having a Coke or grabbing a Kleenex. That's kind of like the ultimate. But essentially, it is being that top of mind, the first company that people think of when they think of your industry. You need to craft ads that compellingly position you as the top choice for your offering. So it's not enough to become people to become familiar with you. They need to understand that you're the best choice. And then the key thing is delivering enough repetition for long enough to imprint your brand. And that's where most people chicken out and don't make the investment to do that. So in terms of the brand mediums, of course, radio and TV still work, absolutely, but they typically need big budgets to be effective. So these don't apply to most of the normal businesses. And to be honest, for most companies, there are better opportunities online anyhow. Not all, though. Again, there are still some great opportunities. So social and display are the other mediums. And that's basically advertising that you see in your social media plus website banners. And they allow really effective brand advertising on small budgets, but even agencies usually get it wrong. And I hate to say that. Over the years, we've done a lot that hasn't been perfect, but definitely how most folks execute is not quite right. And just as a quick example, on the right here, there's an ad for Indochino, which is a company that was founded locally originally. Anyhow, that's just an example of an ad, actually, and it is a mix of direct response and branding, right in social media. And on the left there's a Vancouver Sun screenshot showing a banner ad that's available. And that's one that you can actually place there through the Google Display Network. It gets a bit more complicated than that, but we won't go there today. So for strategy, where the big issues are is that most companies and even agencies and even ad salespeople, even the vendors, pick huge audiences, which actually typically means a lower cost per click or a lower cost per thousand. They pick these huge audiences, but that means that almost nobody sees enough impressions to cement your branding, to make it stick. They talk, there's various radio formulas, but radio is awesome because it has been around for well over 100 years, and there is science behind it around frequency and repetition. And so, for example, some folks feel that you need to hear a radio ad a minimum of 3 times a week for a certain number of weeks before it takes effect. Or before the branding takes effect, rather, and that those same sort of principles absolutely apply to display advertising as well. And so, really, it is right sizing that audience that you're targeting so that you can afford to reach them consistently. And there's an analogy I use. Well, there's an analogy I stole about the idea of taking 10 people 100% of the way to your advertising goal versus taking 100 people 10% of the way. And again, that's what we see most often happening with accounts that we look into, is that 100 people going 10% of the way. And that's probably the biggest reason why the branding advertising fails. So if you want to do this rate sizing, you can leverage demographics, you can leverage geography, you can leverage interests. Of course, you do have to leverage the reporting to understand and tweak, but it is absolutely manageable to do that rate sizing exercise. Some tips for social and display. One tip is to split up your audiences, and initially you're going to be doing tests and trying things, but you want to split up your audiences so that they're not all bunched in one main audience, but rather split up your distinct audiences into separate audiences to target with separate small campaigns, so you can measure their response separately and actually understand which ones are working. If you're going to get into Google Display, which can be extremely powerful, but out of the box is an absolute bag of garbage. You need to get super sophisticated on how to do your placements and targeting and negative placements and blocking sites that have bots clicking and sort of a million things. But you do just basically need to get super sophisticated there. And then again, I think we've beaten the rate sizing to death. And so there's an interesting relationship between brand and direct advertising. And basically, companies that do successful brand advertising actually get better results with their direct ads, and they can charge higher prices because people see them as being more established and credible and viable. Interesting example, going back to, we had the opportunity to do search ads for an extremely large housing development for a period of a couple of years. And we saw them at different times do radio, go off radio for a big chunk of time, do radio again. And what we were seeing, and again, as traditional media skeptics, but what we were seeing was that when radio was running regularly, that the cost per acquisition through search was about 15% less. So the big challenge is whether that improvement is worth the cost is really dependent on the offering budget and timeline, and that's sort of unique to everyone. Some other advertising situations. So obviously a lot more complexity than what I've been describing so far, but discretionary sales. So when I say discretionary sales, again, something like a t-shirt. If you happen to see a funny t-shirt in your feed that's just perfect for yourself or for a friend or a spouse, $20, $30, that's a discretionary purchase where you don't have to do it. You weren't planning on doing it, but you saw it and you bought it. Typically, it includes things like a fairly low price point that you don't really have to think twice on or check with anybody else on. Sometimes financial barriers are removed, like with slightly larger purchases where you do have to think about it. Sometimes you'll find like easy financing for, say, furniture or appliances to remove the financial barriers. Often folks with using direct response and speaking too of direct response in display specifically, people will give a satisfaction guarantee to remove any risk from doing it. That's another thing that works really well. And then we've all seen the 1 day only or 2 days only, and that is around creating a sense of urgency. For my days in sending millions and millions of permission emails, I can absolutely tell you that all of these things work, but particularly the sense of urgency. If somebody feels like they have a lot of time to think about it, they might look at your ad, I'll think about that, maybe I'll check them out tonight when I'm home from work. If it's like, oh, you got to buy right now, it's like more people will buy right now. Obviously, there's issues with getting overly promotional and damaging your brand, but we won't touch that today. And again, this is one area where display does work better than search. So another situation is longer sales cycles. For example, like that customer relationship management example, or IT is a funny industry. In IT, the purchase cycle, I'm told, is around 2 years. which is why in our early days we had some very frustrating experiments trying to get some traction going for some IT firms. But when something takes that long to have a purchase happen, that usually involves a sales funnel to get to the endpoint. The sales funnel involves a period of awareness, which is usually social is great for awareness. Search can creep in there, so social and display. There's a period of consideration, and then a period of action. And with these sales funnels, and we're just coming close to wrapping up shortly, so we won't stay too deep. Some of the sales funnels, for instance, a fairly common one is a retargeting funnel, where you might run display and social ads to build awareness and engage users. And then you can actually narrow down and then just target through retargeting those users who engage with your ad, or who liked your ad, or clicked on it, or who watched the video in your ad beyond a certain point. That's really powerful. We really enjoy have fun with those ones because they do work quite well. Lead magnets, or another element that probably everybody's experienced, whether it's a free trial or a white paper, or anything that you sign up for that is typically free to gain access to. And then, I mean, we have a web host that we have 120 websites hosted on now, that I became aware of them and became a client through a lead magnet that they were putting out. Basically, it was how to manage dozens of WordPress sites without losing your mind. And that was something that at that time I couldn't resist looking at. So yeah, long story short, that can absolutely work really well. And then usually those lead magnets are followed up with marketing automation. So in the case, for instance, of the web hosting one, after that initial white paper that I downloaded, they kept sending through marketing automation a series of informative emails that both educated me on a few topics around their hosting platform, and eventually I gave in and signed up as a client. So in terms of measurement, fairly straightforward. You want to measure most everything. One thing that's interesting is most advertising platforms have their own advertising pixels and their own advertising tools. You'll still want to check with a master analytics platform, though, like Google Analytics 4 is what pretty much everybody's using. But suffice to say, sometimes the social platforms, the way that they measure and attribute conversions is really favorable to themselves and not always accurate. So you do want a third party look at those sort of things. Direct response advertising, aka the search advertising, is usually quite easy to measure. Basically, you just set up and then track goals for all the relevant actions you want to take place, and then you're able to attribute them back to the ads. Branding's a bit harder to measure, but you absolutely should still track engagement to help zero in on your best audience's most effective platforms. So if you put a brand ad out and nobody engages with it, versus testing another area and a bunch of people engage with it, you do know which one's working best, even though it's a little hard to measure the long-term value. In terms of mitigating risk, as I was just talking about particularly with the brand ads, but also applies to search, you want to identify some initial sort of proxy conversions or early indicators for measurement. And essentially, when you start advertising, you're probably not going to make a bunch of sales right away, but you really need to see some indicators that you're reaching the right people. So we'll measure things like time spent on website, the number of pages visited, and then we can often very quickly identify parts of campaigns that simply aren't working, get rid of them. You want to test like crazy. I think that goes without saying. Along the lines of testing a lot, you don't want to be making any huge commitments. And I'm thinking mostly of like third-party ad vendors that are selling packages and programmatic advertising and packages. There are no guarantees. Most ads don't work right out of the gate. You've got to work at it. So the idea of making a multi-$1,000 guarantee to a specific type of advertising without seeing any results first is really scary. And then again, to mitigate risk, you really do need to focus on that full sales funnel and understand what's happening after somebody clicks through your website to make sure the experience actually works there. And that's harder than it might sound. So just again, picking on vendors, some tough questions for vendors. You want to ask what you can expect in terms of results, if they've worked in your industry, if they have some success stories. Something I always like to do is, can we do it if somebody has and we do from time to time buy programmatic ads or large advertising packages on behalf of clients. Asking about an initial trial, totally legitimate thing to do, especially if they can't offer any really good examples of how things work. If you're buying on a CPM basis, which is where you pay on per cost, the cost per 1,000 views, you need to ask what kind of click-through rate they can expect. And of course, what happens if these expectations aren't set? You also want to ask if they report on reach and frequency in addition to impressions and clicks. If they don't, there's some reason to be concerned there. And then also understanding, and this is vendors both selling advertising as well as managing advertising, wondering, there are robots out there clicking on ads and costing advertisers money. And so you want to understand if bots are an issue or accidental clicks are an issue on the platform and solution. There are ways of measuring if you are getting crappy clicks, by the way. Not enough time to get into that today, but we can absolutely look into that. And what happens if it is a problem. And then also, again, like I said, what happens if it's not working out? These are things that will make ad reps squirm. And I don't want to be mean about ad salespeople, but they're the worst. Often don't understand their own offering or how it actually works in the real world. So you do have to be really careful. And I'm kind of joking about them being the worst, but yeah. So in terms of, we've been doing monthly webinars for a while, although I am taking a little bit of a vacation coming up. So we don't have anything planned for next month, but we will let folks know what's happening with the next one after that. Actually thinking about a preparing for 2024 kind of more general session. In the meantime, we'd love to answer any questions either here on the call or following up with me personally afterwards. Love to hear your feedback. Of course, we do these to help get the word out about our company. So if anybody's interested in doing some work together, we'd love to chat. I'm really easy to get in touch with. You can find me on LinkedIn or rob@plusroi.com. So the formal part of things is over right now, but we will do a bit of Q&A. So if anybody has some questions, now's the time to throw them into the Q&A box. And I did have a couple of folks asking things beforehand. So I'll get started on those, and then we'll see if any more questions come in. One person was asking, or rather saying that they had heard that they should now go broad in Google Ads and let the algorithm do the work. What that actually means and what that relates to is that Google has started making recommendations to use what's called broad matching, which gives Google in search leeway to advertise or rather to throw your ads up based on just about any kind of keyword that it thinks makes sense to your offer. Google is actually recommending that in their account and through their ad reps, and it's the worst thing ever. Especially for small budgets, it really doesn't work. In theory, if you had a massive budget, you could go super wide with your keyword targeting. Google would measure all the signals from all of that and then refine it, and the algorithm would just do the best bidding you could imagine, and your ads would be awesome. I mean, I've never seen it work, but that said, I mean, there are some experiments you can do with broad matching to uncover keywords that you didn't understand, but in general, no, absolutely do not go broad with the Google Ads stuff. Another question came in about the best way for startups to advertise, and that one's really tough depending on the startup. And so if you're a startup that has a product type that already exists, is known, you're going to be competing. Typically, search is probably a good place to go, depending on the nature of the product, especially if it's business to business. But the challenge there, of course, is there's competition who's doing it better than you're going to be doing it at that point. So really for startups, we generally recommend niching down and find an audience segment or a keyword topic or something that is kind of too small for the bigger companies to pay a lot of attention to, and then sort of master that before sort of expanding into the larger pockets of stuff. And then on the flip side, there is a real startup dilemma or quandary that we regularly see. And that is if somebody has kind of a revolutionary product, and if it's brand new, essentially nobody knows to search for it yet, because like they might love it, but they don't know it's out there, so they don't know to search for it. So in that case, kind of leaning more towards absolutely the display and social, and quite frankly, more towards influencer marketing, which is sort of advertising, but definitely different. But that would be something that I would consider there. There was another question about blended ad types like Google Performance Max campaigns, or PMax as they're known. And those campaigns essentially just take every signal that they can get from the internet. They mix display ads and banners with search ads, and they even bid on sort of branded terms. And so it's just a real mix of it's kind of an all-in-one sort of ad type. In Google's mind, they've created the ad type to end all ad types. Well, it's called Performance Max. So they think it's awesome. And they can work really well at times. In other times, we saw an example just last week of a merchant who had launched a Performance Max campaign. It was outpacing all their other campaigns, and then we actually helped them analyze it. And it turned out that 5 of the 6 big sales that had come through the Performance Max campaign were actually people typing the brand name of the company that was doing the advertising. So, and there can be some value in that, but it definitely wasn't what they were expecting to see there. And there are other ways of doing that as well. Another question came up that I'll never, certainly not going to be able to answer in a couple of minutes, but basically whether advertising attribution is accurate. And by advertising attribution, it means whether the tools are capable of attributing sales or conversions to the right source, to the actual ad that drove it. And it's challenging. It's fairly straightforward for those urgent and immediate purchases, because somebody clicks, they go to a website, they then book a call, fill out a form, they buy something. In those cases, the attribution is extremely accurate. However, in sort of sales situations where there is a funnel and people are going through a consideration phase and looking at 3 or 4 vendors and going back and forth to the site a few times, there's attribution that is pretty good for that, but you do have to know what you're looking for and get fairly sophisticated in the analytics, because it is actually tracking sort of whether somebody converted on the first visit, the 4th visit, the 3rd visit. So basically what you'll want to do is understand your own product situation and how long your sales cycle is, how many visits it typically takes to the site, what other influencing factors might be. And then with that information in mind, go to the analytics and look at, you can actually do different attribution models and compare all the models. And in that case, you can get a really good idea. Not a perfect idea, but you can get a really, really good idea of which advertising sources are actually valuable. Advertising and marketing sources, because of course you can track every other way that people come to the website. So with that said, I'm not seeing any new questions, so I'll wait just another moment to see if anything does pop into the Q&A. But at this point, I think we're done for the day. So happy Friday, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed that. Would really love any feedback or suggestions for future sessions. Thanks a lot.